welcome to this episode of BeyondBIM. Today we will be discussing the future of offsite construction and its changing nature by hearing directly from Lauri Tuulberg, the CEO of Welement. The concept of offsite industrialized construction has existed for many decades, yet it is seeing an increasing demand and growth in the housing sector due to the growing need for affordable housing. Whilst academics have long written about innovative processes for offsite construction to improve productivity, in reality, it is the industrialists at the front line of construction fabrication who have sought to implement those ideas and change the process of traditional construction. Welement is one such example of a growing innovative offsite construction company based in Estonia, which specializes in timber-framed construction. And now let's begin with our guest interview by hearing what Lauri has to say on offsite construction and his start to this growing industry.
I think it was very logical for me to start studying engineering at some point. But I think what was different about my studies was that I did another degree in industrial engineering besides civil engineering. So I studied in Hong Kong the whole concept of supply chain management, industrial engineering, and I think that really opened my mind into these subjects of lean production, quality management, supply chain management, that have been sort of available into the manufacturing industry for decades, but I think this has sort of not been a main topic for the construction industry. And I think I have always sort of had problems with these stagnated systems, and I think when I see something that, this has been done the way that has been done just because it sort of has always troubled me. And I think the last project as a project manager, so I was a civil engineer, engineering site manager and project manager. And the last project I did was an 8-story residential building. And I think that during that period, I really started thinking about the construction duration or the whole concept of time a lot. And then I think when we did that project, we tested out a lot of sort of tools that are more linked to lean construction, like Last Planner, and we tested out several apps like PlanGrid and then Genibelt, and I think, but at the end of the day, I saw that when we don't change something really significantly in the process, it's really difficult to sort of significantly affect the construction time. So I think that was the period when we started Welement, and the whole sort of prefab industry in Estonia has actually been very well developed. Mainly the timber prefab industry has been very well developed in Estonia, because most of the industry is actually exporting to Scandinavian markets. So I think Estonia is the biggest exporter of prefab products and systems to the Scandinavian market. I think almost 95% of the production goes to export. And
wow. Okay,
it's not a lot of people understand how, but I mean, most of the markets, Sweden is a very well developed prefab market, right?
Yeah.
And maybe the most developed in the world. And but what the problem is that their producers are doing it for their own market because they don't have any sort of significant need to export. But in terms of Estonia, we have only 1.3 million people. So there's not really a market here. So there's a drive to export this. And then I think this has very much affected how the Estonian prefab industry thinks about logistics and prefab in a broader sense.
Okay. So obviously, going from Hong Kong to Estonia was probably quite a transition, and their construction industry and nature of it is quite different. What were the sort of key learning points that you saw from that?
I think, Estonian construction, I think, naturally we have the heritage comes from the Soviet Union in a lot of ways. And actually the precast or the concrete precast industry is very well developed. And these are the systems that originated maybe from France and then transitioned into the Soviet Union and then spread from there to these sort of linked countries, or how to say it correctly. But so I think in Hong Kong, I didn't really study civil engineering. So my topic there was industrial engineering, and this was completely new to me. And at that time, I thought that logistics is just bringing products from point A to point B, and then you understand that actually there's a whole there are so many concepts behind it to make it efficiently, and then this is something that actually affects us in our completely, I guess, everything what we do, what we consume in our everyday lives. We are actually affected about supply chain management. But I think what was really surprising to me when I became aware of these principles, and it was that construction has completely neglected them. So I think when I came back and started to work as a civil engineering, it was very I was very sort of optimistic about the possibilities of using these tools. But I think usually the construction industry is very sort of conservative in terms of using innovative principles, and it as a single source, it's very difficult to change this mindset. So
for the novice, then you say that the key is to change the process. Could you explain to somebody that maybe isn't as familiar what exactly is construction industrialization and offsite construction, and what is its importance overall?
I think the whole concept of construction industrialization. Sorry, my mother tongue is not English, but has been around for quite a while. So I think it has its roots, and maybe first significant one would be the Sears Modern Homes catalog in the States, and then I think maybe the biggest shift happened with the modernist movement and Bauhaus and Le Corbusier, and then so I think these concepts have actually been around and for quite a while. But and I think the true innovation happens when there are these mega trends that create this shift. So maybe in the middle of the last century, it was just the post-war housing demand, and so there was a demand to look into systemize the approach of construction, right? So this is not something really new, but I think it's going through at the moment the new wave. So it's very difficult to say where it's moving, or will it. I don't believe it will fade off, but the lack of productivity in construction is talked about more and more. So, and I think this happened maybe, I hope I'm not wrong, but I think this has happened maybe in the last 4 or 5 years. So you can see that there are so many articles, so many new companies coming up with trying to tackle this problem of productivity. And I think when we started Welement, which is a offsite construction company, we sort of really saw what productivity and the use of time actually means. So in usual construction, the timeline is spread out on quite a long timeline. Most often the projects are a year or 2 years long. So the cause and effect scenarios are very difficult to see, right? So, and what is actually causing the lack of productivity? And I think this drive into construction industrialization is just trying to solve this issue in the last wave, or even in this time as well.
And then talking about industrialization and then this lack of productivity, do you see from your experience with Welement that the clients are actually changing their demands? Has the client or the building owner changed, and has this had some kind of impact on the ways in which now the construction industry is providing services?
I think definitely, yeah, because we can even see this in the Estonian market. So you could say that because time in Estonia doesn't cost as much as it does in Scandinavia, right? So that's a really big effect. Why I think industrialization has happened in construction in the Scandinavian market, because time itself costs so much there. So they have started thinking, okay, how do we actually save time? But in Estonia, it hasn't really happened for quite a long time. But what has the recent trend is that there's a really shortage of skilled labor in the Estonian market as well, and there's also, of course, a demand. But and now what we see is that actually clients, or actually even the regular sort of construction people, or even project managers that have been in construction for decades, they are starting to think differently. They are approaching. They're not just trying to drive costs down, but they are trying to look into how to improve quality, how to do things differently, how to not waste time on site. So I would say that in Estonia, it has happened in the past 2 years. So yeah, it's. I would definitely say there's a shift happening here.
Mm. And then I also recently came across your very interesting article, which discussed the use of robotics in construction. So can you tell us a little bit more about the implications of robotics, and maybe even discuss some of the misconceptions about it?
Well, my point with this article was that using robots is something that is happening in every industry, right? So this is something not even only in manufacturing, but also in business processes, and when we're talking about RPAs and maybe process mining and so on, and whether it's on the software side or hardware side, it's something that it's such a huge megatrend that it cannot be stopped. I think this is probably because technology or machine learning, and I wouldn't want to go into AI, but I mean, this is something that is such a huge innovation at the moment that I think this is changing everything what we are doing or how we are working. But when we're talking about construction, then this concept of robotization, the main question is like, where do you actually use the robots? Do you do it in the unpredictable on-site environment, or do you do it in a factory environment? And I think the main question here is like, what are actually the available possibilities for using robots, and the concept of feasibility, and I think in this sense, it makes much more sense for construction to look into available possibilities in robotization instead of sort of developing completely new robots and bringing them into unpredictable environments. So in my mind, it just makes so much more sense dividing the product, which is a house, into transportable pieces, and just doing the final assembly on site. And this is something that has happened in the car industry with the original equipment manufacturers just putting the modular pieces together, and there are suppliers who are making them in other factories and just bringing them into the final assembly factory. So this helps to control the quality better, and also control the speed and most importantly, I think the sort of the volume of information. So information or data is a huge part of this, and I think construction has very much neglected this data collection, data processing aspects of what they're doing.
And is that something that you are closely observing within your company?
Well, yeah, we are using a lot of data processing, data collection. So I think this is, we can see from, at the end of the day, what we're doing is we're building houses. I mean, the product itself is still a house, whether it's a 1-story, 2-story, or a facade element project, which is a hybrid system with concrete structures. But at the end of the day, it's still construction, right? But we're just building it differently. So, but what we can see from our point of view is that the timeline, which is in our controlled environment, we can see every sort of cause and effect scenario that affects time. So when a project moves quickly through a factory, it's profitable. If there are so many delays, if there are stoppages, it quickly can turn into an unprofitable project. And I think this is something that construction has neglected. As I mentioned before, the timeline is spread out on a year, and usually the data collection aspect is very difficult to tackle in construction because the projects themselves are spread out, and there are sort of separate companies within a company, I would say, which has a lot to do with the sort of the project manager and the team, and what is their sort of processes and how they work. And then I think in that sense, it is very difficult to collect meaningful data from the construction sites. But it's possible to collect useful and meaningful, accurate data in a factory environment and control quality and safety and so on. So in that sense, in my mind, it just makes so much more sense to move into offsite construction more and more.
Okay. And then in regards to that, with data collection and effectively we're digitizing a lot of our existing processes, it's been said that BIM is kind of the stepping stone to attain lean construction and offsite construction. Has that been the case with your company, Welement? Are you guys utilizing BIM, and does it really have a big part to play in that transition?
Well, I'm very cautious about using the word BIM at all. I mean, my point is that in my mind, BIM is just a tool. It's an enabler. So, so the point is that what's the most important sort of letter in BIM? I think it has been for a while now. The most important emphasis has been on a modeling, so building information modeling part. But I think the most important word is actually the information part, and I think construction doesn't really understand it at the moment. How much power actually comes from using information. And well, in Estonia, for instance, well, it has started, of course, from the design engineers part, because they want to avoid clashes. Because if they are doing something wrong and they have to redo it, they are actually they're losing money. Yeah. But what has been neglected, I think, is the information part. And from our part, we are designing the project because we have machines in our factory that need they need commands, and these commands come from the model. We are using HSPCAD for design, and these CAM-CAD commands are actually a very good way of how to look at BIM, because if the data, the client for the data is actually a machine, then you start understanding how important it is to have accurate and data that is that has a higher quality.
Right, so that it's machine readable, effectively.
It's in a way, yeah. Because I mean, BIM it has been, I think, it doesn't really make anything better on its own, right? It's a tool. Yeah. So, and I think it falls under the broader aspect of modern methods of construction. So I think in my mind, BIM is something like the ERP systems for the manufacturing industry. Mm. And the whole point about this is to collect data and to use data to make your processes more efficient. Of course, construction is more difficult. I understand the product is changing, and we need the model part to just interpret the building and to help collaboration between the different parts. Well, the biggest issue, of course, is that the industry is so fragmented. So I think BIM is, of course, a tool to help to tackle this fragmentation, to help these different parts, architecture and civil engineers who are designing the building or doing the engineering design. And then, of course, the construction people who are actually going to build the product. So this is something that helps this communication, but in the biggest problem, I think, at the moment is still the mindset shift that still keeps this fragmentation inherent in the system.
And so the mindset shift is what is often quoted as, the people is the hardest barrier to overcome. So has that been the case then? Do you feel that that's one of the key elements as to why the construction industry, although it's tried to emulate the automotive sector, it's struggled for a long time to do so?
I think definitely. This is, I think the biggest shift at the moment, what is happening is that there is a generation shift happening in the whole construction industry. So you have young people stepping into leadership positions and management positions, and they have been, they have grown up with technology and the use of technology. So there's no, there's no, I think the previous generation has had problem with this because they don't feel so confident with technology. But as more and more young engineers are stepping into these sort of these positions where they actually make decisions on a broader company-wide process sense, they will start thinking IT and technology first instead of the other way around. Yes. And so I think this could be this underlying shift that is happening. And of course, you see like all the other industries using technology and IT so much, and you have the very vibrant startup industry trying to solve everything with apps. So I think this is something that construction industry just cannot neglect anymore, and is starting to use these tools more and more.
Okay. So then lastly, where do you yourself foresee the offsite construction technologies evolve, let's say, in the next 5 to 10 years? Are there things that are just coming across the horizon that we've not yet experienced?
Well, firstly, I think that not all buildings should be prefabricated. I mean, we will always have these sort of icons that, whether they're opera houses or public buildings, schools, there's not really a need to look into prefabrication for it. It's possible, of course, but the question is whether it's feasible. But if we're talking about affordable housing, which could be one of the biggest issues at the moment in terms of urbanization and lack of skilled labor and bringing the cost down. So I think it's something that's going to definitely be a norm rather than an exception. So I think I wouldn't be surprised if the first question for these projects would be that how much can we prefabricate, or what's the degree of prefabrication for this project, whether we're using full modular or panelized systems together with concrete structures or bathroom pots, or it's just a matter of, if you can't prefabricate everything, and volumetric units are not the solution for everything, because the transportation costs are a significant factor, and sometimes it's just not possible. And architecture-wise, also it limits. It brings about a lot of limits. But it's maybe a subject that has been interesting to me is the concept of mass customization. So I think in the next 5 years, we would definitely see this concept being more developed and using construction systems as well as giving clients a set of options, but still harnessing the mass production aspects to a certain degree. So I think this would be something that would be more and more talked about.
And I suppose that's again probably going to lead to the example of the changing needs of the clients. So the changing demands of the customers, whereby we're so used to all of these items being delivered to us on virtually next day deliveries, and we can do everything online. Do you feel that is going to then push forward that change in the construction sector as well, that the consumer is beginning to demand those types of services?
It could be, but I mean, when we're talking about construction, the car industry is giving the client options, right? The client is very much putting the car together themselves. But when we're talking about construction, I think it's of course more difficult. Not everything can be copied from the car, the automotive industry. But there's definitely there should be options for the client. But the whole question is like, what are actually those options? And a lot of the times, I think the client is also very how to say it politely, but they have a very mixed understanding about what they actually want. In my mind, I think we don't, if you are a very wealthy person, you will most likely hire an architect. This is something that is a sort of a luxury sort of something that is not for everybody, I think. But if we're talking about affordable housing, there should be some options, but they shouldn't sort of affect the price so much, because at the end of the day, that's the biggest key is to how to reach this affordability in housing. And but of course, it is, in everything we do at the moment, we have choices. So the construction or real estate development industry has to go with the same flow.
Okay. Any last final words about what are the next upcoming challenges for Welement?
We are looking into new markets at the moment. So up to now, the main market has been Sweden, a little bit Finland, Estonia is growing, Norway as well. But now we are looking into Germany and the UK as well. Iceland is as we're delivering first houses into Iceland at the moment.
Wow.
It's been quite interesting, and we're really next year we're developing our processes, fine-tuning them, fine-tuning how we collect data, trying to sort of get the data more and more accurate, so that we can get real. We're doing data visualization at the moment to help us interpret the trends, and then we're thinking about building the next phase for us. But we'll see what the market is doing as well. So at the moment, the beginning of the year seems very interesting, but well, these are turbulent times, so we'll see.
Yeah. Thank you again for listening to Beyond BIM on CoinPM. If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear more of our latest episodes of Beyond BIM, please visit CoinPM, which is available on SoundCloud, iTunes, and all other major podcast providers.